This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Our guest, Michael Linden of the Center for American Progress, maintains that it is conservatives, not liberals, who are blocking entitlement reform. And a conservative retired colonel criticizes President Obama's foreign policy for being too militaristic and for continuing America's reliance on a national security state. And Bill Press talks about energy policy with the National Journal's Coral Davenport. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Michael Linden directs the Economic Policy Shop at the Center for American Progress and explains that sometimes deficits matter and sometimes they don't. And right now, they don't. And we're joined now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, by Michael Linden. He's Managing Director for Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress. His work focuses on the federal budget and the medium and long-term deficits. Michael Linden, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we'd love to talk to you. And, you know, one of the huge elements of the economic debate in this country is the role of entitlements. Social Security, Medicare, food stamps, etc. But you say it is conservatives, not progressives, who are blocking entitlement reform. How so?
Yeah, that's right. For the last 3.5 years, progressives have put forward a lot of responsible, reasonable, many would say centrist proposals to reform these entitlement programs in the context of a larger discussion about the budget, and also tax reform is the other piece of all this, because that's the other issue that's driving our long-term budget challenges. But every time progressives and sort of emblematically the president tries to go to the table and cut a deal with conservatives on these issues, conservatives just they either walk away or they make demands that are completely unreasonable. It's like if you went in to buy a car and you make a really good offer, and the salesman comes back and says, "That's a reasonable offer, but what if you paid twice as much?" Well, that's not really a good negotiation. Who's really to blame for the car not getting sold? And that's kind of the situation we're in now. Is that liberals are willing to make reforms, they're willing to talk about these issues, but Republicans have made basically they've made demands that are unreasonable, which makes it impossible to actually get anything done.
You know, we talked about your work focusing on the federal budget, medium and long-term deficit. What's the proper balance between, say, job-creating stimulus and the need to cut spending?
Well, in the near term, we should not be cutting spending at all. You know, this year, next year, even the year after, there's no need to cut spending. Spending is not too high. In fact, probably it's too low given the economic challenges we're facing. So the balance should be 100% job creation measures in the near term. In the long run, say after the next 5 years or so, and certainly after the next 10, we are going to have to do some reforms that bring down federal spending with the aging of the baby boom generation, with the retirement of the baby boom generation. There's going to be a lot more people in the big federal programs, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid being the big ones. And so we either need to reform those programs so that the costs are a little less, raise taxes to pay for those, or a combination of both. And my view, and most folks' view, and actually if you ask even bipartisan folks or centrist folks, they'll agree, is that we're going to need to do a combination of both of these things.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, well, center to left of center have been kind of saying that all along, right? You know, that we really kind of need to do a combination of things. We don't necessarily have to cut everything, which is what more have been the stance on the right.
That's right. This is not a new position. I mean, if you look at all of the bipartisan budget plans, they're not all great. They all have problems, but they all agree on one thing. You're going to need to do a little bit of everything. You're going to need to have revenue as well as some reforms to entitlement programs. And it's really important to understand that it's not as if these entitlement programs are out of control. It's not as if the benefits are, super generous and people are just getting rich off the federal government. That's not at all what's happening. What's happening is we have a generation of Americans, a very large generation of Americans that's about to retire. And so even if the cost stayed exactly pat, even if they didn't increase at all, we would still have an overall increase in spending just because there's more people in those programs. Yeah. So our choices are either to cut those benefits, which I don't really want to do, or pay for them. And we should pay for them. We're a rich country with very low taxes relative to other countries. We absolutely have the wherewithal to meet all of our obligations.
Is there any way to convince Republicans or the American public that spending on education, technology, and infrastructure pays off in the long run? And, for me, part of this has been bad messaging coming from the White House. I just don't think their argument has been strong enough for doing just this.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is I don't think it takes much to convince the American people of this. They believe this. American people believe that investment in the future in things like infrastructure, in science, in technology, in education, these are good things that the federal government should be doing. The problem is that conservatives have managed to frame this discussion about as government spending in the abstract. And in the abstract, nobody likes government spending. In the specific, everybody likes government spending. So the role that progressives need to play is helping people understand that when conservatives talk about cutting government spending, what they really mean is cutting those very investments that do produce future economic growth, that do make everybody better off in the long run. You look around and you look at where economic growth has come from in the last 50 years, and you certainly would have to give some credit to things like the Internet and the interstate highway system and technology advances that came out of things like NASA. All of that is government funded, and if we cut those things today, who knows what we will be foregoing in the future.
We're speaking with Michael Linden, Managing Director for Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress. President Reagan's economic advisors used to say that deficits don't matter. So why do they matter now, or was Reagan wrong on that?
Reagan was wrong. I mean, deficits do matter sometimes. That's the thing that I think a lot of people have trouble with. We live in a complicated country, in a complicated economy. What is true in one circumstance is not true in another. So the idea that deficits never matter is wrong. The idea that they always matter is also wrong. When you have a big gap in what the country is able to produce and what the country is demanding in terms of production, then we need more deficits, not less. And that's the problem we've had over the last few years, is that there's been this big gap in demand, and there aren't people out there in the country buying the goods and services that the businesses are able to produce. And so we've had this kind of slow recovery. That calls out for more spending, a larger deficit. But in normal economic times, when things are kind of running smoothly, when unemployment is low, when the economy is producing at full capacity, then we really do want to be careful about deficits, because they can have a lot of negative impacts. And fundamentally, for progressives, the big worry that I have about long-term deficits is that debt that we're incurring will eventually have to be paid back with interest. And interest payments on the debt is money that we're not spending on infrastructure or science or education or the safety net. So there's that trade-off as well in the future. So deficits do matter. But they matter sometimes and not other times. That's unfortunately not a small, easy, rule of thumb answer, but it is the truth.
Yeah, and there's a good point there, too. It depends on what you're spending that money on. I mean, when you're spending it on infrastructure and you're spending it on education, that money's coming back to you. In the longer run, that money's coming back to you, because if you put people to work, they're going to turn around and be able to, go out and go see a movie that they weren't going to be able to go out and see before, or go out to dinner. All that sort of thing, that accounts for something, and that seems to be lost in the conversation.
Yeah, it's true, and the conservatives have spent the last 3 years arguing that public spending doesn't create jobs, and it's just not true. And it's also, they don't even really believe it, because at the same time they say don't cut defense spending because that will cost jobs, and a dollar spent in the defense industry is still a public dollar. And it's it's just worth remembering. Government is not going to be the primary economic driver. It can't be, it shouldn't be, but it does have an important role to play doing things that the private sector can't or won't do. And this sort of reductive thinking, this black and white thinking that either government is always good or always bad, it's not very helpful, and it's also not true. And it's the same thing with deficits. They're always good or always bad. It's not really true, and we are smart enough, we're an advanced enough society that we should be able to determine when deficits are appropriate and when they're not. Today they are appropriate. 10 years from now, if the economy is back on solid footing, they're probably not as appropriate.
Okay, so the president keeps looking for the holy grail of a grand bargain with Republicans. That hasn't worked out so well. Does he have any powers he is not using in order to break the fiscal gridlock?
I don't think so. The president can only do so much. At the end of the day, conservatives in Congress will have to get over their allergy to taxes. That's the only way forward. We are not going to be able to get a grand bargain unless conservatives agree to raise some more revenue. We are an extremely low tax country. We are still headed for low levels of tax revenue at the federal level, even with the fiscal cliff deal that was agreed to at the end of December, at the beginning of January, I should say. And if we're going to solve our budget problems over the long term, we're going to need more revenue. And unless and until conservatives in Congress come to that conclusion, we're going to be stuck in this kind of gridlock on the budget, at least.
Yeah. Your organization, the Center for American Progress, proposes shifting the focus from deficit to jobs. So what specific policies would accomplish that?
I think an infrastructure investment is probably number one. We have this big deficit in terms of our investments in roads and bridges and railroads and ports and things like that, and that would get people to work right away. We've also proposed setting up the president's pre-K or universal early childhood proposal. This is something that's going to help create jobs right away, but it will also, really importantly, help lay the foundations for future economic growth. We know that investments in early education are some of the most efficient and effective investments that the public sector can make because the payoffs can be huge. So that's something we should do right away. We'd be open to all sorts of other ideas. I think raising the minimum wage right now is a good idea. That'll help spur more demand and get more money flowing through the economy. I think that's a good idea. I think that we should be considering some return to either a payroll tax cut or the making work pay tax credit that expired over the last few years. Those are good ideas. We should be thinking creatively about ways to get people back to work and to bring the unemployment rate down much faster than it has been going down recently.
Okay. Michael Linden, Managing Director for Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress. As always, Michael, great to talk with you. Thank you for being with us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. A retired Army colonel and military historian critiques both conservatives and President Obama for continuing America's historical reliance on a belligerent foreign policy. That's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
A few years ago, during consideration of a bill being pushed by a Republican elder in the Texas Senate, first-term Senator Wendy Davis asked him a question about it. Rather than respond to this Democrat, this woman, the old bull replied dismissively, "I have trouble hearing women's voices." No more. Even a stone-deaf old bull would have been jerked to attention by the clarity of Senator Davis's voice on June 25th. For more than 11 grueling hours, she literally stood tall, filibustering a mean and demeaning attempt by extremist Republican leaders to put the state government in charge of the most personal right of women, controlling the decisions about their own bodies. Davis's principles stand, in Texas no less, rallied over 2,000 mothers, grandmothers, girls, and others to come to the Capitol from all over the state, packing the gallery in quiet witness. Quiet until 10:04 p.m. That is when GOP leaders tried to silence her by unilaterally ruling her filibuster over. Suddenly, the ruling Solons were startled by a high-decibel reprimand from their subjects. The gallery erupted in citizen outrage, causing chaos on the floor. Then, when the leaders tried to force a vote, the followers took charge, with jeers so loud that senators couldn't hear themselves. With the session set to expire at midnight, panicky leaders tried to push the clock back, which led to deafening chants of shame, 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 ultimately blocking the GOP's brutish ploy. This is Jim Hightower saying Texas Republicans have already re-rigged the rules so they can get their way on another day, but they can't escape the huge significance of this defeat. As Senator Davis rightfully noted, while she was the one standing on the floor, it was the people's filibuster that stopped the bill, and that has awakened a new movement in Texas that won't be stopped.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor. All for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Andrew Bacevich was a lieutenant colonel in the Army and is now a military historian. He says President Obama is a product of the national security state's mainstream because he believes that war is the preferred instrument of American statecraft. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Andrew Bacevich is a professor of international relations and history at Boston University, a graduate of West Point and a Vietnam veteran. His provocative book, The New American Militarism, How Americans Are Seduced by War, has been reissued in paperback with a new afterword assessing President Obama's role in promoting militarism. Andrew Bacevich, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Glad to be with you.
One of your conclusions in the book is that the use of the military has been antithetical to the nation's founding ideals. How so?
Well, what I mean by that is the following, and let me say first off that there's no question that the United States has been a belligerent nation throughout its history, meaning that when we felt the need to use force, either to defend ourselves or to take something that we wanted, we never hesitated to do so. That said, with regard to military institutions, armies, military service, Americans at the time of our founding tended to be quite skeptical, hence their preference for citizen soldiers as opposed to standing armies. And I think one of the things that's changed over the last 40 years or so is that we have modified our view of soldiers and military institutions and more broadly force so that we look to war not simply as something that we need to resort to on occasion, but we've made military power the preferred instrument of American statecraft.
So is the United States a modern-day Sparta? Is there a thrill of war?
Well, I think the Sparta comparison probably is a reasonable one. The thrill of war, of course, there's a thrill of war in the sense that as spectators of war, that's what most of us are. We mostly are spectators, not participants. Mm-hmm. It's possible to see war as thrilling. I think virtually anybody who participates in war directly knows that that's a false image and comes to know rather quickly that war is in fact a horrible thing.
Now, you're very harsh on President Obama, concluding that he and George W. Bush share the same DNA on military policy and that Obama has continued America's path to permanent war. Why do you think that's so?
Well, because President Obama is very much a product of the mainstream. He is an establishment creature. I think in many respects, in order to be elected to high office or to be appointed to a position of any responsibility in the national security apparatus, you've got to sign up to certain propositions. And one of those propositions is that the United States must be, in perpetuity, the supreme military power in all the world. Obama subscribes to that just as much as George W. Bush did. Now, that doesn't mean that Obama and Bush are identical in their perspective on military power. I think that Obama, understandably and wisely, has learned that Bush's preference for invading and occupying countries really is not such a good idea, and therefore Obama has evolved a different approach to carrying on the war that began on Bush's watch. So rather than invading and occupying countries, Obama's preference is for relying on missile-firing drones and special operations forces to conduct his war.
We're speaking with Andrew Bacevich, professor of international relations and history at Boston University, also the author of The New American Militarism, How Americans Are Seduced by War. Your career as a military analyst started on the conservative side of the spectrum. How much did 9/11 and the U.S. adventures in Iraq and Afghanistan shape your views?
Well, I still am a conservative as far as I'm concerned. And frankly, I think that anybody who is genuinely committed to conservative principles will be skeptical about war and military power and military institutions. I think a genuine conservative is somebody who believes that war needs to be an instrument of last resort, that it should be used for defensive purposes. So from my point of view, the people who typically are viewed as conservatives or described as conservatives, but who are promoting a neo-imperial militaristic foreign policy, they are in fact anything but conservative.
Okay. Now, since the end of World War II, the United States has been involved in any number of military actions, yet we haven't really won any of them, except for perhaps Grenada and Panama. Why is that? Are we choosing the wrong battlefields, or are we simply becoming inept?
Well, I think the answer is that war is a unpredictable business. That it is a realm of human activity that is so fraught with chance and so frequently leads to unexpected outcomes. It's so difficult to control that's the principal explanation for why our military record is, as you suggested, at best a mixed one. One of the illusions that many people in Washington fell prey to at the end of the Cold War was that we had somehow figured war out. They misread the reality of Operation Desert Storm and concluded that we could win quickly, decisively, economically, any fight that we chose to initiate. And that has turned out to be an enormously costly illusion.
Yeah, we're back in that region and have been now for quite some time, obviously. Why can't politicians and the public say no to what you call a permanent military caste?
Well, they think they can't get elected or reelected if they say no. They are also on the take. I mean, the national security apparatus, what President Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, is a source of much of the money, not all of the money, much of the money that lubricates American politics. So we have had, on the left and on the right, people like Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul, people in Congress who've attempted to point out the downside of our militaristic policies. And you'll note that neither one of those guys really was treated seriously in terms of achieving national stature.
Has America changed its fundamental moral position against starting preventive wars?
Radically, emphatically. I mean, until President Bush, after 9/11, promulgated his promulgated his Bush doctrine of preventive war, previous presidents had unanimously condemned preventive war as immoral. That was the position of the United States. You can find emphatic quotes by people like President Reagan saying the United States will never start a war. The United States will never use force except for defensive purposes. Now, whether or not we adhere to that in practice is another question. But in terms of the position we laid out, the United States had always rejected preventive war. That then flipped in the wake of 9/11.
And before I let you go, we're still in very deep as far as Iraq, Afghanistan. We've got Syria that we're now dealing with, obviously not to the same scale. What do you do if you're in charge right now? You can't just wholesale pull out of Iraq and Afghanistan, can you? Or are you saying, yeah, that's maybe what we should do? Or would you say that?
We've already pulled out of Iraq, and I think the president is correct in committing us to withdraw from Afghanistan. I mean, I think that, the Iraq story is still unfolding. There's no question about that, and seems headed for an unhappy ending. I think that rather than focusing on sort of the operational level decisions, intervene here, withdraw there, there are first-order questions that we have avoided confronting for too long. What kind of world do we need in order to be able to make good for our citizens on the promises made in the preamble of the Constitution of the United States? It has the emphasis on military power since 1945, and especially since 1991, enhanced our ability to make good on those promises. And if the answer is no, as I believe it is no, then we need to really rethink the fundamentals of U.S. foreign policy and really rethink the purposes of our military establishment, which I believe ought to be focused on the defense of the United States.
Okay. Andrew Bacevich, professor of international relations and history at Boston University, the author of the book, The New American Militarism, How Americans Are Seduced by War. Andrew, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Coral Davenport of the National Journal.
And, this is summer, so it's a good time to talk about global warming. Anytime's a good time to talk about global warming. We haven't been talking much about it lately, but then the president gave a major speech last week, which just sort of changed the agenda, quickened the debate over what to do about climate change. Nobody's happier about that than Coral Davenport. This is her beat, after all. And sometimes she's saying, hey, what about this issue? What about this issue? It was
like Christmas and New Year's all in one.
There it is. Well, Coral, the president did this just for you. Energy and environment correspondent for the National Journal. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Sure, good to be here.
This morning. And it's exciting to see some stuff happening, huh?
This was the speech that the president gave last week is probably the most sweeping, historic, environmental statement that any president has ever made in history. Certainly on the issue of climate change. This president has talked about climate change before. This was a nearly hour-long speech in which he just finally put his back into this. He didn't call on Congress to act. He said, "This is how I'm going to act."
All right. So Carl's going to bring us up to date on what the president is actually doing by executive action, and maybe also what we can expect, what decision we can expect from him on the Keystone pipeline. You join our team this morning. Peter Ogburn and Dan Henning.
Hey.
With Alicia Cruz on the phones and Cyprian Bolding on the video cams, keeping us looking good on current TV. Before we get into those issues, a big anniversary yesterday. I didn't realize until I saw it on NBC News last night with Brian Williams. Yesterday was the 50th anniversary of the zip code. Been around for 50. It was 50 years ago they started the zip code.
I was surprised it's so young. 50 years.
It's been around longer?
Yeah, I figured it had been around for a long time.
How'd you get your mail where it needed to go before that?
Right,
exactly.
Right. Well, they were having a hard time, right? And so they came up with this system, but it was very controversial at the time because people thought this is too much work. Why should one more step we have to do? They didn't want to do it. So they actually had a huge advertising campaign to convince people that this is the right thing to do. You got to get on board, including a little jingle like this.
Every day, you know you gotta have a zip code on the envelope. A zip code, so you won't just have to hope. A zip code, morning, noon, and night, and everything will be alright.
A zip code.
You get faster service and a lower cost. Fewer mistakes, no time ever lost. A lot less handling along the way. No damage for you to pay. You know you gotta have a zip code.
Zip code is good
Corny,
branding.
but it works, I guess. Yeah, and now everybody uses it. And try to mail a letter today. You know, mailing a letter is when you have an envelope and you write on it and you take it to a place called the post
Heard of
office.
this, yes.
You've heard of it.
I remember it.
Not many people do that anymore these
All right, quick
days.
poll. Who here does the full extended zip code, those 4 extra digits
extra
at the end?
No.
Do you know those? No, neither do I.
No.
Okay.
I mean, who does? Businesses maybe do. If you have a business reply envelope, it's on it. Otherwise,
Right.
I don't even know what those. I have no idea what those extra 4 digits.
A lot of times they're P.O. boxes. I have a P.O. box in mine, and part of my number is my P.O. box. So it's just sort of an extension to get it
but
even
you wouldn't
further.
think about mailing a letter without a zip code.
Of course.
And in fact, it wouldn't get there. No. All right, so climate change. Start off with that issue today. But first,
this is the Full Court
what do you got, Dan?
Well, other headlines making news on this Tuesday. Some NFL fans don't want their Aaron Hernandez jerseys anymore, while others do. Following the murder charges laid on the former New England Patriots player, the team is allowing fans to exchange his number 81 jersey at the team store without a receipt for a full exchange this weekend for 2 days. That being said, some fans have opted to put their jerseys on eBay. ABC reporting most jerseys are fetching between $200 and $300 each for the original purchase price under $100.
Yeah, guess who doesn't want to see an Aaron Hernandez Patriots jersey? The Patriots.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
They'll happily give you a new one with a different name.
But the people who want to still wear them, oh yeah, let's wear the murderer's jersey. Yeah, it's weird.
Jennifer Lopez is back stateside after performing a private gig overseas over the weekend, but she has come back to a not-so-good reception because she performed for the president of Turkmenistan. The former Soviet Union's country's leader is labeled as a dictator by the United Nations, which they say he has a long way to go on human rights. Her publicist telling the AP that J-Lo, had she known he was a bad man, she would have declined the gig. No word on what she was paid for it, but now people are asking that she donate that to charity.
How can you accept an appearance in any country without knowing something about the country you're going
I feel like
to?
J-Lo would have people to vet that.
Yeah,
right?
There's a little thing called Google and Wikipedia. You would think. And another stunning upset at the All England Lawn and Tennis Club yesterday. The best female player in the world went down. Serena Williams losing to Sabina Lisicki of Germany in 3 sets in the round of 16. On the men's side, second-seeded Andy Murray did survive his match. He and Novak Djokovic are the only top-ranked, well-known players that are left. Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, Maria Sharapova, and Victoria Azarenka all have been knocked out of the tournament.
This Wimbledon tournament is incredible. It really is. Yeah.
All brand new crop coming up.
It's almost enough to make me watch tennis.
Here we go. So this speech, it's interesting because the first 4 years, a lot of people, Carl, gave President Obama grief that he didn't do anything about climate change, and he really didn't. Right?
Well, no, that's not true. He did 2 major things in the first term. The first is he used his executive authority. to create new fuel efficiency standards for cars. He doubled the fuel efficiency standards for cars, which is a major step forward for reducing emissions from oil, from automobiles. And it's very important because it's notable that he did that using his executive authority. He basically, bailed out the auto industry, and when they were kind of, in the crunch, they came together and got a deal on agreeing to do these standards, which they didn't really want to do.
Right. A hugely significant move.
He also, the second thing he did was he tried to get Congress to pass a sweeping economy-wide cap and trade bill. That was the bill that he ran on. It was the bill he gave lots of speeches about in the first campaign. It did pass the House, and it just fell apart in the Senate. And I think that if that bill had passed, we would have seen, a price on carbon that would have affected, the entire U.S. economy. It would have cut emissions from power plants, from automobiles, from manufacturers. It would have kind of spread the hurt. It also would have created revenue for investing in new clean energy research. That was what he wanted to do, and it fell apart in Congress. So I think in the second term, that was the famous cap and trade bill that a lot of folks in the House, Democrats in the House, really ended up getting hurt for voting for.
Right.
So I think in the second term, what we're seeing from the president is we're not going to get anything out of Congress. First term, put the ball in Congress's court. They failed. Second term, not running for re-election. President doesn't care if he gets hurt politically by taking action on this. So now he is scooping up all the authority he has and kind of doing a round two on using this executive authority.
And his and the launching of that really was the speech at Georgetown about a week ago now, right before he left for Africa. Just before he left for Africa, wasn't it, or 2 weeks? It was before the European trip.
It was just before. It was last Tuesday, just before he left for Africa the next day.
Right. Okay. And in terms of one thing that this does, and as you've written about this, the United States has been criticized for all other nations, European nations particularly, taking the lead on global warming while we've been dragging our heels. That's no longer the case now, is it?
This has fundamentally changed the global dynamics in terms of how the world is trying to take on climate change. I've been going to these global UN climate change summits for years, and the way the rest of the world looks at this is, the U.S. is the largest economy, it's the last remaining superpower, and it is historically the world's biggest emitter of carbon pollutions. It's the big, it's the number one contributor to the problem. And the U.S. has gone into these negotiations and tried to force other countries, China, India, other polluters, to sign on to some kind of binding commitment to cut their carbon emissions when the U.S. is again and again and again failing to do it at home. We've seen this dynamic where the U.S. goes in and says, well, you guys sign on to something, and then our Congress will pass something.
Yeah.
And the rest of the world just doesn't buy that anymore. Now the dynamic is the U.S. can go to the table and say, look, we've done it. We've taken this executive action. We don't have to wait for Congress. It's happening. And that really changes the dynamic for the rest of the world.
So that makes us a leader, if you will, not somebody who's just not doing their job. And what are these specific actions then that the president can take, and what difference will they make?
So the specific action he's going to take is he's going to use authority under the Clean Air Act, under existing law. They had already moved forward under the Clean Air Act to propose rules that would force new or future coal-fired to cut their emissions. Those rules had been proposed. They hadn't been finalized. Once they come out, they could effectively freeze construction of new coal-fired power plants, which are the biggest contributor to global warming emissions. What the president...
Let me stop you there for a second. We're still building coal?
Not anymore.
Okay.
I mean, not. That's.
I mean, yeah.
Well, and the reason the U.S. was doing it is because the U.S. is the Saudi Arabia of coal, and it's a cheap source of electricity. And there was no regulation on the carbon emissions. If you can do that, why not keep building coal plants? So this really changes that dynamic. And then what the president announced in the speech last week is that those rules will also apply, and this is a really big deal, to existing coal-fired power plants. So the nation's fleet of existing coal-fired plants will be subject to regulations cutting their pollution of carbon emissions. And over the long run, we don't know what those rules are going to look like yet. The draft will come out, he said, a year from now in June 2014. But it's very likely that those rules will lead to the shutdown of our fleet of existing coal-fired power plants. That's huge. That gets at the heart of the U.S. contribution to global warming.
Shutting them down, not just putting some filters on them or cleaning up their emissions?
Well, here's the problem with that. This is a really big deal. There is no technology that exists to cut carbon emissions from a coal-fired power plant. If you have a coal-fired power plant and you want it to significantly cut its carbon emissions, your option is probably to shut down. There's one technology. It's called carbon capture and sequestration. It exists in government labs. It's so expensive that it's not available commercially. So we may see a huge uptick in the research in that technology. But right now, what it looks like is over the long run, we will probably see, unless there's a big technology breakthrough, a shutdown of coal-fired power plants.
And what source of power replaces the power lost from these coal power plants?
So here is where the Obama administration
new nukes or what?
Here's where the Obama administration just got a huge stroke of luck dropped in its lap, and that is this new abundance of U.S. natural gas. This is the fracking boom.
Yeah.
And natural gas has half the carbon pollution of coal. And thanks to this sort of big fracking boom that we've seen, power companies have already taken a market shift to invest in natural gas plants instead of coal plants because it's so abundant, because it's so cheap. So what the expectation is that these regulations will say that existing coal-fired power plants probably have to cut their emissions in half. If you're a power company, there's two ways you can do that. You can try to, figure out some kind of technology, try to invest in very, very expensive carbon capture technology that's not really commercially available, or you can just switch and to natural gas, which has half the carbon pollution of coal, and right now is running at about the same price, sometimes cheaper. So I think we're going to see a big shift, a huge market shift in the U.S. from coal to natural gas.
So the whole energy field is changing, thanks to that speech that the president gave a couple of weeks ago at Georgetown. Coral Davenport reporting on it for the National Journal. The fracking is not something a lot of people are happy with, however. You might want to talk about that. Give us a call at 866-55-PRESS.
This is the Full Court Press, the Bill Press Show, live on your radio and on Current TV. Heard around the country and seen on Current TV. This is the Bill Press Show.
Hey, 26 minutes after the hour. I want to hear from you on this issue. Very, very important. No more important issue than climate change in terms of survival of the planet. I want to hear from you on Twitter at BP Show and on Facebook at facebook.com/Bill Press Show. Just a little time left here with Coral Davenport, the energy and environmental correspondent for the National Journal at nationaljournal.com. So, Coral, I got to ask you, what about the Keystone Pipeline? Because a lot of people are saying if the president's really going in this direction, how can he approve the Keystone Pipeline? This is going to just make matters worse. So, what did he say about it? What can we expect?
I saw on Twitter people talked about his language on the Keystone Pipeline in that speech, and they said it's wide open enough to lay a pipeline through. The general interpretation of the way the president talked about the Keystone Pipeline in that speech is...
he said
that he would not approve the Keystone Pipeline if the environmental impact study showed that it was not in the national interest and if it substantially increased global warming emissions.
All right. Okay. Translate.
So there's already been a draft environmental impact study of the Keystone Pipeline by the State Department, which found that it would not substantially increase emissions. So the read on that is what the president was doing, the political purpose of this speech. He absolutely does seem serious about moving ahead with these coal power plant standards. But by giving such a big speech and making his environmental, pleasing his environmental base so much, he set up a classic Obama move, which is he giveth and he taketh away. The read on this right now is that this speech kind of makes his environmental base happy, sets up some very big and significant moves on global warming, so that a couple months down the road, he can go ahead and approve the pipeline, which is what had been expected all along.
All right. We'll see what happens there. Coral Davenport, thanks for your good work. Thanks for coming in.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Michael Linden, Andrew Bacevich, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to